So we've talked a lot today about what are some problems that man has caused themselves with environmental degradation, and I want to show you just a quick snapshot of some solutions. I did show you the videos from Kenya that showed that women planting trees actually helped rebuild the environment, but I also want to show you, this is a 1986 snapshot of Burkina Faso, and a region in Burkina Faso, and you can notice that you just see the hard line landscape and people standing in essentially a dirt field. And behind the snapshot, you see trees and land, and this was actually the same place from, I think the second picture was taken in maybe 2008 or 2009. And you can see that the land has regenerated itself. And it was done through a simple strategy. The government and NGOs convinced local growers and farmers to place stones along the slopes, or the land slopes, that helped prevent runoff so that the topsoil that was there could remain, and it helped the villagers to regreen their landscape. This next video that I'd like to show you talks about another simple solution to some environmental degradation issues. And it's as simple as providing a fuel-efficient stove to women in small villages so that they don't have to cut down trees and burn wood for fuel.
Hello, my name is Fredo Ngu in Pate, Uganda. Tini ni awor rock menen ticha masiko med wako keke. Anu nungu yente do tako tek kame polamon kere nyira wori ilu me modu yeni ibu ngame yin jalo tiki chawa balle kere pool kere leyi moga me geri ilu. Pero wan moni no ko pe manu keken ticho moga me gera me tong buju moni enda ko kere nyira ni. Awor pola pachi mon tieti kere kena me kertu hadek ame modu yen kere tikere o medate ateha ate frate nya ho loni susana me be dana jalla me nu konni borwa to ra susana ke yelle to twal lite do lanch ento eno ko ma joho ame yamono tia kollo ma ko ten temi yo jemri kena rama chawa beach tunia bichial tenu kitte tedo me jo tedo kere keno nien duong to twale yipin pien yore mara me jora tik kere petie dong mio wa donyo kere plan me monno keno wek keno nien ke tedo kere tero kar chawa chiel keken eka yen na menu etiu kere nuno nok dong plan na masiko me pitu yen kere monno keno ni tie me gwokko pasen ne yen na mo tiu kere yae pier bio tuna pier boro eka lobo nuo roch ke liero me wiloba loro nuo tengo lwenye pa me dwok pinya no nok eka area me jo berie nuo pia ber do kar ma ngwesho be kema ma ha kire kisha twal menen no kita me pin kire yen to kere dong te mi yo adonye plan me pitu yen kire me rocho area romo wa we ko tina me abiri ya ngewa nuo konginora ber pi Uganda. This is Ferungu in Pade.
So I mentioned earlier in this lecture how farming is linked to soil erosion, and one of the reasons that is because of monoculture and centralized food crop production. Since about the beginning of the 20th century, the world has lost approximately 75% of the varieties of domesticated plants. And the reason for this is that the amount of small farmers has very much decreased and the amount of large commercial farms has increased. And with that increase in commercial farming, you're seeing large swaths of land, farms that are 100 or 200,000 acres, planting only one variety of crop. And because of that, we're losing not only the genetic diversity, but we're also losing, with the monocropping, we're losing quality of soil because the plants that are being planted will leach nutrients from the soil, and then as that happens over time, it degrades the quality of the arable land and the ability of that land to produce soil. So when we look at loss of genetic diversity, a lot of people want to say, well, so what? What does it matter if we only have one or two types of potato or one or two types of corn? That's actually a very important aspect of humanity and of living, is to have genetic variety. If you look at the Irish potato famine in the 1870s, The reason that famine was so devastating to the population of Ireland is that they depended on one particular genetic variety of potato, and when that potato was susceptible to blight, they lost, not only that crop, but they lost their major food source. And that's why so many people died of starvation during that potato blight versus the current Peruvian potato blight that happened in about 2008. Peru is the home of the potato, and they have approximately almost 250 genetic varieties of potatoes. The image on the right shows you some of that variety. And when the blight happened there, it only affected particular varieties of the potato. So that yes, they did have issues with hunger during that time, but you didn't see the massive loss of life that you saw with the Irish potato famine because there was genetic diversity and some of the plants were not subject to the blight that occurred, and so there was still a food source available. If you look at apple production, there are about 2,500 varieties of apples that are grown in the U.S., 7,500 worldwide, but only about 100 different varieties are grown commercially. So you won't see great genetic diversity in the type of apples that you see in the grocery store. The same is happening with the corn crops. On the left, you have what's typically called Indian corn, and that's the way that corn it generally looks when it's grown. Instead of what you see on the right, which is what most people think of when they think of corn, that's what they think of. But corn, there's actually great variety in corn and great genetic diversity in that crop. But due to commercial agriculture and due to monocropping, we've chosen this yellow corn that we assume is the best one, and that's what's being sold on the mass product. And so by decreasing the genetic diversity, if a disease comes along that affects that particular type of corn, we've removed the other genetics, so there's not going to be a survival crop that comes through. Fortunately, there are great swaths of seed libraries. They are very, very, very protected laboratories where seeds are being collected and stored to protect the genetic diversity, so that if something happens to our major food crops such as corn or wheat, because we have focused on one or two species of that crop, we can recover. But again, recovery from something like a blight, when you have a monocrop or you have a single genetic variety you're relying on, takes a long time. So it's not something that would solve a crisis situation, but it is something that humanity is trying to do to protect itself from a destruction of the current crops that we rely on. So why is this happening? A big reason is the industrialization of agriculture. Agribusiness tends to consolidate processes. When you look at any sort of business or corporation, one of the biggest key benefits of a business or a corporation is their ability to capitalize on economies of scale and economies of scope. When you do that in a plant or farming situation, the idea is that the more that you can make things uniform, the more you can control them, then the easier it will be for you to capitalize on that economy of scale. And so that's where you get those 100 and 200,000 acre farms that are only planting one particular type of one particular crop. Agribusiness is also in the business of buying seeds, and so they will buy a seed, and there's actually been, I think Monsanto is a main company that does this, and they will genetically modify a crop so that it'll have a terminator gene and then also be what's called, I think it's Roundup resistant is what it's called. So a farmer can buy seeds from Monsanto, plant them, spray Roundup, and the Roundup will kill all of the weeds except for the one plant that you're growing. And then once that plant grows, the farmer can harvest it, but then he can't save the seeds because they've also genetically engineered a terminator gene, which will prevent the seeds that are grown from that year's crop to be replanted and grow a new crop. And so that way, a lot of corporations are hooking in farmers that typically could save their seeds and maintain genetic diversity in their crop and contributing to this industrialization and monocropping technique and idea, with the notion that whoever controls the seeds controls the food. There's also a lot of issues, as you've been reading in the book enough, with government subsidies. I won't get into that in this lecture as much, but I want you to pay attention to what you're reading about that in the book, because I think the author really paints a good picture of the interrelationships between the agricultural industries, governments, and large and small farmers. And those interrelationships, particularly the one between farmers in the developed world and farmers in the developing world, really draw you into a lot of the intimate issues of what is keeping some people hungry for longer periods of time.